Hello and welcome to the show. Certainly, conversations over the last several months have focused on the future of work and the future of talent. Today, we're going to combine the two and look at how they affect each other. We're delighted to have with us two experts, one on work and one on talent. Barney Lonis of Humanetics and Mercer Consulting will certainly focus a bit on the work side of things, and Tim Mickleborough, the founder of GME, Global Marketing Exchange, will share his thoughts on talent as well as the thoughts of some of the trainees that he employs. Today's conversation will focus on the digital versus physical workspace and also at the heart of the employee experience. Plus, the internationalists surveyed marketers worldwide in late June through one of our insight surveys to benchmark sentiment on work and talent now. The survey touched a nerve as respondents shared their visions as well as their concerns. We'll refer to some of those results in today's discussion. Okay, so let's start with a few basics. Let me ask you both, what do you see ahead in terms of return to the office versus working remotely? And just as a note, our insight survey from June indicated that an overwhelming majority of marketers, as a matter of fact, it was 95.6%, see themselves as working remotely more often for the foreseeable future. Of course, we have not defined what foreseeable future means, but let's begin. Okay, so let's look at the physical workspace. Let's get some reactions. Barney, shall I start with you? Will we reimagine our office to reflect ongoing social distancing and less regular use?
Yeah, I mean, my hope would be yes, right? I've been a digital proponent of change for 20 years, and it's been hard, right, to drive behavioral change when there are better tools to drive collaboration, information sharing, where there are better channels to seek out customers and clients. There's always been a sort of a degree of resistance to try the new and to change the things that need to be changed because, it's too difficult. And from my point of view, it's fantastic from a work point of view and from a culture point of view that I think, managers and organizations have had to come to terms with what does a more digitally driven workplace look like? How can that drive productivity? How can that make us more efficient? And how can it drive new learning opportunities for everyone at work? So I'm optimistic at that count that a more digital kind of workspace will create good opportunities. That said, it worries me slightly that 95% of marketers are kind of going to be working more from home, because I equally know that there are some really important parts around growth and learning and mentorship and that social interaction and that random happenstance that sort of fuels creativity. We've got none of that. So particularly from a marketing point of view, we have got to figure out ways to fill that kind of creative void and water cooler moments, and that fundamentally is harder to do across digital channels.
I like the term water cooler moment. That will have to be something new that's in the lexicon. But you touched on something that I thought was interesting. You talked about onboarding new employees or trainees and so on. So Tim, why don't we go over to you? You work a lot with young talent.
Sure.
that people are looking to employ for both their global perspectives as well as, shall we say, their millennial or Gen Z perspectives. So how are your trainees finding the onboarding process, as we call it now? Do they mind if it's digital? Do they want this to be in person? Are they, because they're young, are they more flexible on these issues? What do you find?
Well, I mean, I think, when I talk to them and I ask them about that kind of question, there's no doubt that the preference would be to to sort of meet their colleagues in person as they onboard. And I think especially in that onboarding period, which is, you know, when as a new employee, as a trainee, you're feeling your way, you're trying to understand, build some early relationships with colleagues, supervisors, etc. So in essence, yes, I think without a doubt, in the onboarding process, they would love that to be more in person if they could. But I think what some of the young marketeers of today have going for them in a major way is they're just sort of more natural ability to be familiar with digital tools that would allow them to kind of ask those questions on the fly that you know, that perhaps traditionally you would have to wait for you know, some sort of classroom environment at an office to go through some kind of onboarding process. So I think even though, you know, they'd like to meet their colleagues in person and go through that process in person, I think they are way better equipped to onboard and to get up to speed quicker because they're just more digitally savvy. And I think especially they're much more digitally savvy with the kind of tools like Teams, Slack, etc., that can kind of almost ask those kind of sideways questions to colleagues that they might learn, might have traditionally got through sort of sitting in an office and asking the person next to them. But so, you know, even though it's difficult, I think they're well equipped for it.
No, that's interesting because it almost sounds like, listening to both of you, that maybe the great compromise here will be that the office does become a place for periodic meetings, celebrations, onboarding and training, meeting new people, and maybe even a remote workspace when it's convenient. I know in doing so many of these Zooms and podcasts that although many people are enjoying working from home, if you ask women with small children, they're not even turning their cameras on. They joke that they've torn their hair out during the first month of COVID, and they can't wait to get back into a workplace where they can focus. So it's you know, maybe that is the compromise. What do you think? Does that sound fair?
I mean, for my part, on the one hand, you know, it could bring massive advantages. I mean, if you pick up on the example that you said about young mothers who still, you know, carry probably more than 90% of the burden of childcare, having workplaces that are kind of designed mentally and job descriptions that are also designed to be more flexible to support childcare and to help sort of, you know, manage children's homework and things like that, I think is, you know, well overdue, you know, as we drive for gender equity in the workplace and thinking through how to support both mothers and fathers in their roles as childcare. And I think you're right. I agree with you, Deb, around the need to reimagine the physical workplace. There needs to be a very good reason to go in there, and it's got to be around social and fun and collaborative space. I always think of the example of cathedrals, you know, which is a very clear example of architecture that is based around, you know, a value and purpose-driven organization, and the design of that edifice is there to make people in awe of the institution, and everything about that building is architected to create those feelings and those serene moments. And I think the physical workplace needs to do exactly the same. It needs to be constructed in a way that really delivers high value to its employees, rather than these boxy, meaningless sort of workspaces that don't inspire or really add value.
Interesting. You talked a little bit about the physical. Let me just move to the digital side of the equation for a second, if I might. Tim, I just wanted to pick up on something that you said about so many young people are a little bit more adept at some of the technology that's being used. For myself, I still drop Skype calls unintentionally, but our research also indicated that connecting with team members is just as efficient through tech solutions, or at least 67% said that. Yet a lot commented that there is a downside. And, talk about water cooler moments. They don't only miss the human interaction, but the spontaneity of ideas. Do you want to talk a little bit about how your trainees find that and offer the perspective of a younger generation?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when I interviewed them and I talk to them on a regular basis, I think to an individual, they would all say, and they have all told me that, look, their ideal situation is a combination. It's a bit pat to say, oh, a hybrid model, right? And that seems very simplistic. But I think the key thing, and maybe a slightly deeper point, is it's really about autonomy. I think there's another level. I think, yes, look, if you're telling people what they're going to do, then being able to go in a couple of days a week safely and collaborate with colleagues around a project in person, and I think that would satisfy some of that social requirement you talk about. But I think on a higher level, on a deeper point, I think this idea of being able to self-direct how you work, and including going to the office or not going to the office and getting work done in different places, I think that's really what people are looking for. And having companies allow people to be autonomous about how they decide to work, that works for them, at the same time is seen by the individual as the best way, or the best way of the team to get work achieved in a sort of optimum level. So I think there's a basic answer, and then I think there's a quite interesting discussion about companies allowing employees, junior and senior, to really self-direct themselves.
No, that is, I do think that is, I think that's far from a simple answer. I think that is a very sophisticated answer, because I think that's probably a critical element right now of what companies are concerned about. And I think they're balancing, as Barney stated earlier, this blurring of work life and home life with younger people or new people coming on board that do want the flexibility. I love how you talk about self-directing work, which I think is new language for these conversations. Based on what you just said, why don't we just for a moment take a look at corporate culture? And I think we all know what that is. It's certainly the shared ethos of a corporation, and maybe shared is the operative word here, because it means people creating a culture. And I think we've also seen so many examples of how corporate culture drives strong brands. Now, I guess one of the things that people are a little bit concerned about is how you unify an organization, or the spirit of that organization, when everybody's working from home. Why don't, how do you organize that spirit? Maybe Barney, could we I'm sure you've thought about it in your notions of physical work as well as remote work.
Yeah, I mean, I come from a background of being a sort of B2C marketer, I suppose, building brands through digital channels, building sophisticated customer experiences, from the first marketing message through to the kind of feedback surveys and the experience that you design in hotels or airlines or wherever. And I think through my work at Mercer and others for a number of years in my consulting, it struck me super clearly that a lot of the skills that we've established as marketers around building brands based on values and architecting experiences both physically and digitally based on those value sets, those principles apply exactly the same to employees. So culture is a values-based experience design. You need to be clear about what are the aligned things that bond us together, what are those values that we hold true, and then what are the kind of the artifacts and the habits and the ceremonies that as a team we're going to build, you know, to bring those values to life? What's our style of celebration? What's our style of performance management? What's our style of kind of sharing the workload or being customer focused? So I think, you know, you're right. I think the culture piece being values based, you build brands from the inside out, from your employees through to your customers. And I think, you know, then when you apply that to what you expect team members to do in certain situations, that's culture. And you have to articulate those behaviors. And the best brands with the strongest cultures actually tend to crystallize those behaviors into a handbook that really spell out super clearly, you know, what will happen if someone asks for help? Well, we're a culture where we lean into that. We don't walk away from it. So I think, you know, spelling out the beliefs and the behaviors that are expected, and also not just how that translates physically, but in a digital disconnected world, you know, you can't go and have beer on a Friday night anymore, and you can't have brown paper bag lunches. So how do you replace those critically important kind of cultural ceremonies with their digital equivalents? I think it's, you know, we're going to sort of really need to think through that in a little bit more detail. I mean, but I think there are many different ways you do it. I attend on a Fridays a session called This Human Moment, and it's run by Keith Yamashita of SY Partners, who are sort of fabulous change management business. And it's an hour and a half of business leaders, creatives coming together at a kind of moment in time, and Keith presents artists, poets, business leaders talking through their issues. It's interesting because in some ways, what I think Keith is doing there is he's building a sort of a cultural moment, a sort of a ceremony of sorts, a gathering point at which everyone can gather around the table and, you know, share in some stimulation. And I think it's sort of things like that that might be interesting avenues. You know, we have to create different types of digital interaction. Some of them, you know, very kind of random apparently, but it's still a shared experience that we can walk away from and respond to.
No, very, very interesting. And I think as long as it's meaningful, that is, you know, critical to that digital experience. Tim, how about some of your trainees? I mean, they're probably, and maybe I'm wrong, I'm assuming that they're probably less, you know, familiar with corporate culture, although I could be wrong, because I know a lot of young people are choosing companies based on what they think is the corporate culture. But, you know, how do they feel about this?
You know, I think, you know, culture, purpose, values, I mean, it's such an interesting milieu to discuss. I mean, and, you know, we could have several hours around this. I mean, for me, you know, I think purpose of a company, of a brand is the guiding light, right? So I think when anyone looks to join an organization, and let's talk about our trainees in particular, when they look at the kind of placements we offer, they look at the purpose of the organization. I do think they are purpose savvy. I think culture is something that they absorb through the process. It's something that's uncontrollable. It's something that is set by the individuals within the organization and how they interact with each other. And Barney was, you know, said that there'll be, you know, manuals around that. And absolutely, there are some companies that are very strategic and very formulaic in their culture. I think the purpose of the organization and what they do and how what they really believe, I think that's the rallying cry that people are really the north for people, and especially young people. And of course, you know, again, it might be a bit simplistic to say, but the organizations with really strong purpose about and a sort of principled purpose about, you know, what they do and being very clear about what they do, and their values around it. I think, you know, if it's better for the earth, if it's if it has benefits for individuals, if there's, you know, I think if it's articulated well, then that is something that certainly younger employees are being attracted to. I think it's probably one of the key things for them as they assess their opportunities. But you know, as I said, I think culture is something that is much more intangible when you're starting to join an organization. But what the company really believes it does and does well, I think that's the key thing.
No, you're absolutely right, and I know that is certainly very much of a strong choice for young people. Let's now end today's discussion because this is a series, and we'll just keep to one topic at a time. Let's end today's discussion with trying to pull together some things that you both said, and I'll call that for now the intersection of employee experience and what marketers see ahead for talent. Just to get your reaction, let me just mention a few points from the survey that we did on the future of work and the survey and the future of talent. Amazing, over 90% of those surveyed said that the ability to be a self-starter is more important than ever. 73% says experience matters more as teams work remotely. 66% said a variety of skills is important in making teams more productive. And another very interesting issue I found is that marketers who we know tend to be optimists said that they actually believe that a lot of this remote aspect of what we're living through will enable us to have access to more talent, in that it doesn't matter anymore where someone is physically located. So I know that's a lot to digest, but would someone like to at least jump in with some of that? I mean, it's difficult to be young and a self-starter, although Tim, you may suggest to me that that's not true.
Well, I mean, I think it is, it's not too young to be a self-starter. I think you see that from children upwards. I mean, you know, you start to recognize very quickly the people who can you know, take responsibility for themselves early on. And I think self-starters are absolutely, you know, it's a key personality trait, if you like. I think we like to also, when we do personality tests on all of our applicants, what we see actually coming through strongly is something called a protagonist. Somebody who's not only a self-starter, but actually quite hungry to pursue certain things through their career. And, you know, I guess that wouldn't be exactly a surprise, bearing in mind these are people who are prepared to leave their home or leave their country and move somewhere else to pursue a job in a new city, potentially in a new sector, and are that sort of adventurous type, shall we say. But I mean, going back to self-starters, I think one of the key things that I think people are really looking for from an employee perspective is flexibility. I think there's flexibility is a big factor, both in terms of employee and employer. And I think, you know, I mentioned it earlier on, I think what employees are looking for as they grow is autonomy, is the opportunity to pursue the work that really drives them, that they can also, you know, help the company. If those things are aligned and they're given that sort of freedom of opportunity to really drive their own work and bring in people in a more fluid and agile environment, that is when you get, I believe, really strong performance, but you also get very empowered employees.
Very interesting. Now, Barney, would they be existing in your work cathedral?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think there are in most businesses and most teams, I think there are two types of work. There's almost business as usual, which is predictable. It's kind of like a sausage factory. You need to build a system so that you can replicate and scale that really fast anywhere in the world. And that work is going to be super useful and super suited kind of to the digital space, because you build a system, you can pull in freelancers, gig workers, people from all over the world, and you've got a well-defined system through which they can work. And these can be really the most important projects in the business. And you build a SWAT team to kind of go in and address that, and then they can disperse after that. So there's that kind of predictable nature of work. I think what's interesting is that there's also the unpredictable nature of work. A lot of innovation is driven by that. And a lot of that innovation is driven by kind of physical energy of being together and that kind of magic of creativity of, you know, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just going to throw it against the wall and make it happen. And I think, you know, whilst you can begin to sort of figure that out in a kind of remote space, it's less clear about how you get the full value of a team when you can't physically be with them. So I think that's you know, a little bit unclear to me. I still would sort of flag that as a kind of potential danger for marketers, that we're not driving enough creativity in that innovation space. And I think the other thing that occurs to me is, you know, from managing a team's point of view, you know, cultural alignment and values alignment is one key payoff for, you know, people within your team, but opportunities for growth and opportunities for learning is another massive value proposition. And if I'm in a purposeless business, but I'm given a fabulous role and a clear path to growth, I think, you know, that growth potential is also a substitute for kind of like, you know, value purpose, right? So I think, you know, a lot of businesses sort of tend to turn off and go, well, we're not purpose driven, right? Well, that's okay. You don't have to be purpose driven, but you do need to create purpose for your employees and create that excitement and growth opportunities. So I think it's just, in some ways, I think we're saying similar things, but the point about growth opportunities, and I know it's especially true in Tim's business with his trainees, you know, getting placements in exciting businesses, that can be a huge turn on. Just the opportunity to have 18 months in an exciting place in an exciting business is enough purpose in its own right.
No, very, very interesting. And I think that we'll draw it to a close with those remarks. I've just taken some notes of some of the things that I found quite interesting, and everything from water cooler moment to self-directing how you work, flexibility and autonomy. You know, the kind of business as usual systems versus the unpredictable aspects of creativity, and getting the full value of the team, and how you have opportunities for growth and learning. These are complex issues, and what I love about this is we also see how connected they are, whether you're talking about talent or how people work. And I'm grateful to both of you, and I look forward to our next session. So thank you very much, Tim, and thank you very much, Barney.
Thanks.
Thank you.